Greek philosopher Plato invited his listeners to imagine a cave. And inside this cave, there was a group of people, prisoners, who are chained to the floor in such a way that they cannot stand, nor can they turn their heads to the left or the right. They can only look straight ahead at a wall in front of them. Behind them is a great fire to keep them warm. And the fire casts shadows onto that bare wall that they see. Dancing shadows. That is the only reality these poor, chained people can know. And Plato says these prisoners cannot see any of what is happening behind them. They cannot know the real world. Plato's mentor and teacher, Socrates, then joins the conversation. Suppose one of these prisoners is set free, he says. This person would turn around, see the fire burning brightly, but his first reaction would not be wonder or joy, it would be pain. The light would hurt and blind his eyes, and even though he had been exposed to the truth, to reality, he would likely run as fast as possible back to the familiarity of his shadows and his chains. Going further, Socrates says, now what if this same person was dragged by force past the fire, out of the mouth of the cave, and into the shining sun of the outer world, the true world? The prisoner would be angry, and in great suffering, he would fight back against those dragging him into the light. But eventually, his eyes would adjust. He would begin to see the true forms of trees and mountains, people and animals, not mere shadows. At night, he would see 1 billion stars overhead and dance in the light of the moon. And in the daytime, he would eventually be able to enjoy the sun, to look up at it, and come to realize that the sunlit world is far and away superior to the cave of shadows and chains. Socrates believed that this person would come to a second realization. He must somehow free his friends, those who remain chained in the cave. So he sets out to do exactly that. He returns to them and begins to tell them of all that he has experienced, trying to break their chains, begging them to take the journey that he had taken. But he sounds like a madman. What is all this talk of bright lights and walking about? And how dare you say this place is not real and true, here where we have always lived? And to this freed man's great disappointment, his friends want no part whatsoever in the world of light and truth. And Socrates concludes that the prisoners, quote, if they were able, would try to kill anyone who attempted to drag them out of the cave. Many people prefer undisturbed ignorance, quiet, dark, limited shadows over reality. Most are not interested in anything that falls outside of their small, limited view. Yet for Plato and Socrates, this cannot stop the telling of the truth. This cannot stop the shining of the light. Once a person has experienced the sun and the shining truth of the real world, that person is obligated to live in that light and to tell others about it. It would be a moral failure to go back and live in the cave. That's Plato's allegory of the cave. And it has been applied to almost every discipline that you can think of. Philosophy, sociology, human growth and development, politics, religion, of course. And it brings us today into close contact with this man, Saul of Tarsus. He would have known this story well, having heard it while in school. He likely debated its meaning with other Hellenistic Jews or Greek philosophers. His hometown, Tarsus, was an eclectic, educated mix of cultures, and Saul did not grow up sheltered from views different than his own. The thing that may have surprised Saul was that he would become a living example of this allegory, a participant. Maybe Luke, who also certainly knew this story, the writer of the book of Acts, does this conversion of Paul, tells the story of Saul to Paul, tells the story this way on purpose. Regardless, the parallels are impossible to ignore. Paul was once chained in that cave of non-reality. He wasn't stupid. He wasn't uninformed. His experiences had simply kept him convinced that he was right. Therefore, his theological opinions were set in stone. His worldview was uncompromising. His way of thinking, his convictions were dogmatic and non-negotiable. Saul was right, and Saul knew that he was right, and no one could convince him differently. He says this about himself in Philippians chapter 3. I am a pure-blooded citizen of Israel and a member of the tribe of Benjamin, a real Hebrew if there ever was one. I was a member of the Pharisees who demand the strictest obedience to the Jewish law. I was so zealous that I harshly persecuted the church, and as for righteousness, I obeyed the law without fault. Paul, like Jesus and all the earliest disciples, was a Jew. He knows his ancestry, and he is a Mosaic Jew. That is, he is committed to the law of Moses, so much so that he becomes a Pharisee. The Pharisees had been around for about 150 years by the time of Jesus and of Paul. They were a party of the people. They were made up of Bible teachers and learners more than ceremonial priests. They had a very good beginning with the highest of motivations. They did not want their country to be destroyed as it had been destroyed in the past. That's their motivation. They didn't want to lose their homeland. And the way that they saw things, they felt that the personal sins of people, not like them, but other people, if those sins became too many, if they stacked up too high and too heavy, then God's judgment would fall and their country, land, religion, and way of life would cease to exist. In this sense, they are protectionist. You can think of them as Puritans, quite prudish, Victorian, extremely uptight. I know I have referred to John Steinbeck multiple times over the years on this count, but in his book East of Eden, he captures this puritanical attitude with perfection when he describes one of his characters, Liza Hamilton. He says this: Liza Hamilton was a very different kettle of Irish. Her head was small and round, and it had held small, round convictions. She had a button nose and a hard little set-back chin, a gripping jaw set on its course even though the angels of God argued against it. Liza was a tight, hard little woman, as humorless as a chicken. She had a dour Presbyterian mind and a code of morals that pinned down and beat the brains out of nearly everything that was pleasant to do. Perfect American literature right there. Liza, Saul of Tarsus are fundamentalists. I'll use that word. In this area, I have some experience. And some of you do as well. And very little can be more damaging, more hurtful, more harmful than hard-shelled, hard-hearted fundamentalism. Fundamentalism is spirituality gone wrong. It is piety turned sour. It is a form of compromised, contaminated religion that has substituted right living with rule following. It is fueled by impending judgment, certain punishment, rather than by spiritual liberation. Fundamentalism trades in the currency of control, manipulation, and coercion. The short of it is this: fundamentalism is a pathology of the heart that has exchanged love for fear. That's what fundamentalism is. Full stop. And I do have some experience with this. I could tell you story after story for the rest of the day. And in fact, I've been telling you these stories after stories for years now. I'll share only one today. I think maybe I was 18 years old. I could have been 17. I was in high school, but I had already left the church of my youth. As soon as I got those car keys, baby, as fast as the 8 cylinders of a Pontiac Grand Prix could take me, I got away from that church. And I started going to this other church that was unlike anything I had experienced. There was so much joy. And it was light, and it was uplifting, and it was healing. And this may sound strange, but it was the first time in a church building that I felt like I could be myself. And that surveillance was not being put against me. I wasn't being watched. And I felt like a prisoner who had crawled out of that cave into the light. I can tell you that that experience, even as a teenager, saved my faith. Because if practicing Christianity had meant remaining where I was out. Can somebody say amen to that? And I know I've just summarized the underlying motivation and premise for our congregation here. But I want people, when they step into this room, to say, it felt light. People were joyful. I didn't feel like I was being judged. I felt like I could be myself. Say amen to that. Now, back to that 17, 18-year-old me. It was a Saturday morning. I was lying on the couch. Looney Tune cartoons were on the television. My mother, God love her, was ironing my dad's dress shirt at the ironing board for Sunday services the next day. In the past, she had made it very clear to me how she did not like my new church. It was too loose, her words. They preached from the wrong Bible version. They had no proper dress code. On this particular morning, I came to understand how she truly felt. My mother said to me, Ronnie, and we hadn't been talking. The only sounds in the air were spray starch and Bugs Bunny. I turned to look at her lying there on the couch, and she pointed that iron at me. And she said, you better get back to our church or God is going to kill you. And she meant it. Thanks, Mom. I looked at her for just a second with that trembling clothes iron. And I said to her, well, God will just have to kill me. Because I'm not going back. She went crying to her bedroom, and I returned to Bugs Bunny and Friends. Now, my mother had been badly, inhumanely damaged by religion. She didn't know it. But she had been. And as they say, hurt people hurt people. As Socrates said, these prisoners, if they were able, would try to kill anyone who attempted to drag them out of the cave. I've made peace with that. But what I've carried with me since that Saturday morning is the weight of how easy it is for good people, church-going people, God-fearing people to have their hearts and minds completely and totally hijacked by poisonous ideology and theology. Who says that sort of thing to their child? Who actually believes such a thing? Well, the one who has only seen the shadows. The one who is wearing chains. The one who has never left the cave of his or her small round convictions because they are terrified of what they might find outside of that small space. These prisoners, if they were able, would try to kill anyone who attempted to drag them out of the cave. I haven't forgotten Saul. How could I? He could be a member of my family. He's just like the stern old men in the churches that I grew up with. He reminds me of one of my particular uncles. He's so pious. He's so sincere. He is so convinced. Let's use his word. He is zealous. The word is zelos. We borrow it directly from the Greek language. It means to burn. Specifically, it means to boil. Saul had this burning fire within him. It was the fire of purity, the fire of commitment, the fire of action. True fundamental fire and brimstone with fire and signs following. Boiling and burning within him. But that's the problem with fundamentalism. It doesn't stay contained within. It doesn't remain as personal piety. It becomes public prosecution. The fear of God, fear of punishment, fear of judgment, fear of failed perfection, fear of all those things that are different. This fear does not stay where it is. It always boils over. And it consumes the zealot and in turn burns everyone and everything that the true believer touches. Paul had these words to say about that zealous life. Saul was going everywhere to destroy the church. He went from house to house, dragging out both men and women to throw them into prison. Acts 9, Saul was uttering threats with every breath and was eager to kill the Lord's followers. Back to Philippians 3, his own words, I was so zealous that I harshly persecuted the church. And then his testimony from Galatians 1, maybe the first words that he ever put to parchment. You know what I was like back then, how I violently persecuted God's church. In my zeal, I did my best to destroy it more than anyone else. I'm belaboring this point, I know. But Saul is as sincere as he can be. He thinks, he just knows that he is doing God's will. In his heart of hearts, his conscience is clear he is doing God's work. These Christians, these Jesus followers, they're just heretics. They had forsaken the God of Israel as he saw it, and their idolatry was going to put the whole nation at risk. So arresting, jailing, torturing, even killing these people was seen by Saul as doing God and Israel a favor. If you don't get back in line, God is going to kill you. And if He doesn't, I will. And God will be proud of me for doing so. So step into Saul's boots as he walks toward Damascus on this fired up, burning mission of his. He is a faithful soldier with orders to carry out. He is deeply religious. And for the way he sees it, he is one of those holding off the just punishment of God. And then it happens. Saul of Tarsus becomes a character in Plato's allegory of the cave. He gets knocked out of that cave and into the light. Saul is dragged by force past the fire, out of the mouth of the cave and into the true world. And if you've ever heard someone say, or we sang it just a few minutes ago, I saw the light, like Hank Williams sang, this is where it comes from. When someone talks about having a Damascus Road experience, it's Acts chapter 9. And then my personal favorite, we're going to have a come to Jesus meeting. Here it is. This is a come to Jesus meeting. You can thank Saul and his experience for all of these phrases because that's what happened. The risen Christ meets Saul on the road, and in that painful, blinding, obliterating moment, all that he once was, all that he once believed, everything that he had been so certain about, his foundational convictions, which had been unassailable, and all of his zealous fundamentalism comes crashing down in a single heap. And it was time to begin anew. It was time to walk into the love and light of God. It was time to join this new, living, real world. And no other human being could do that for him. It was an act of God. I'm going to return to Saul next Sunday, pick him up off the ground, dust him off a little, and get him moving along. Even see him return to that cave to free his friends who are still there. Because that's what one does once one has truly entered the light. They return to those in darkness, even if those in darkness have no interest in coming to the light. You have to try. Saul would write later, as the Apostle Paul, God's light shines in our hearts, giving us knowledge of the glory of God. Jesus delivered us from the domain of darkness. So you are not in darkness, brothers and sisters. You are all children of light, children of the day. Paul had read his Plato, and Luke had as well. And he knew his vocation was to help others find freedom for themselves. For once a person has experienced the sun and shining light of the real world, that person is obliged to live in that light and to tell others about it. Not because that one is supremely enlightened, not from a place of arrogance or condensation, certainly not as finger pointing and Bible waving, being as antagonistic and hard-hearted and closed-minded as he once was, but as one who knows what it's like to have worn chains. One who knows what it's like to be trapped in the dark. One who knows what it's like to have once held small, round convictions. If you haven't compassion for others in the place that you once were, you must ask yourself if you have really come to the light yourself. The Guru asks his disciples, how can you tell when the night has ended and the day has begun? And one answered, when you see an animal in the distance and you can tell whether it's a cow or a horse. No. When you look at a tree in the distance and you can tell if it's a lilac or a mango tree. No. When you look into the village and you can tell if the building is a house or a shrine. No. Well, what is it then? The disciples asked their teacher, and he answered, when you look into the face of any man and recognize your brother in him. When you look into the face of any woman and recognize in her your sister. If you cannot do this, no matter the time of day it is, you remain in the dark. This is Frederick Buechner's simple prayer called a prayer for light. He wrote it at the request of his brother as his brother lay dying of cancer. Dear Lord, bring me through darkness into light. Bring me through pain into peace. Bring me through death into life. Be with me wherever I go and with everyone I love. In Christ's name I ask it, and we all say,